A compassionate therapist fell for her patient and had to walk away. The rain hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the clinic with a steady, rhythmic thud. Dr. Elise Vance sank into her Italian leather armchair and closed her eyes. It was 7 in the evening. Her neck ached, a sharp, familiar knot of tension pulling at her spine. Another 12-hour day. Another day of untangling the messy, broken minds of the city elite. She opened her eyes and stared at the framed university diplomas on her wall. They were supposed to be her armor. Growing up, the cold draft in her childhood bedroom and the empty kitchen cupboards had taught her one brutal lesson. Poverty was a disease, and success was the absolute only cure. I will never be hungry again, she had promised herself at 15. She had kept that promise. Now, at 35, her bank account was full. Her clinic was booked months in advance. Her wardrobe was impeccably tailored. But every night, she returned to a luxury penthouse that was pitch black and entirely silent. She was a brilliant, highly paid machine. A very lonely machine. Elise let out a slow, heavy breath. People pay me thousands of dollars to calm the storms inside them, but nobody knows that I have let my own house leak for a very long time. A soft chime from her intercom broke the silence of the room.
Dr. Vance, your last appointment is here,
her receptionist announced through the speaker.
Send him in, Clara,
Elise replied. She instantly adjusted her posture. The mask of the perfect, unbothered professional slid right back onto her face. The heavy oak door creaked open. Elise braced herself for another corporate executive in a custom suit, ready to complain about his demanding life. Instead, a ghost walked into her office. Leo was 38 years old, but his posture carried the weight of a man much older. There was no tailored suit. There was no scent of expensive cologne. He wore a faded olive-green jacket with heavily frayed cuffs. The collar of his flannel shirt was wrinkled, and a dark shadow of untrimmed stubble covered his jawline. But it was his eyes that caught Elise completely off guard. They were dull, hollow, and rimmed with the deep, bruising purple of a chronic insomniac. He stood awkwardly on the plush carpet. He looked entirely out of place in the pristine, expensive room.
come in. Please, have a seat.
Her voice was soft, perfectly trained to disarm the most guarded patients. Leo did not look at her. He moved with stiff, mechanical steps and dropped into the armchair opposite her desk. He stared down at his rough, calloused hands, his fingers twitching slightly. Elise glanced down at his medical intake file. Leo Thorne, former chief financial officer. Looking at the slumped, defeated figure sitting in front of her, it was nearly impossible to imagine this man commanding a corporate boardroom. He looked exactly like a building that had quietly collapsed from the inside. "I do not know where to start," Leo finally whispered. His voice was raspy, sounding like dry leaves scraping across pavement. Elise leaned forward. Strangely, the exhaustion was suddenly fading from her bones. "Start wherever it hurts the most, Leo," she said softly, her pen hovering above her notepad. Leo rubbed the back of his neck, his gaze fixed firmly on the floorboards. The sleep, I guess, or the lack of it. By the time the sun goes down, I'm dead on my feet. But the minute I close my eyes, my brain just turns on. What goes through your mind? Numbers. Leo let out a tired sigh. Endless rows of red ink. Then the dreams start. I'm back in the boardroom. My old partners are there, in their custom suits, backing me into a corner right up to the edge of the glass windows. And then I fall. He swallowed hard. I never hit the ground. I just wake up sweating, gasping for air like I've been held underwater. What happened in that boardroom, Leo? In real life? The quiet hum of the air conditioner suddenly felt very loud. When Leo finally spoke, his voice was flat, completely stripped of any pride. "I went to prison." He looked up, bracing for her reaction. Elise didn't flinch. She simply waited. 6 months, he said, shaking his head. I was the CFO. When the audit caught the missing funds, they needed someone to take the fall. The paper trail was conveniently tied right to my desk. I didn't steal a dime, Elise, but I wore the handcuffs anyway. 6 months in a low-security facility. By the time I got out, my career was gone. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his calloused hands clasped together. After that, I didn't know what to do next. I was terrified to start a new job, terrified to step back into that world. So, I chose to do nothing. I left all the prestige and the money behind. I rented a cheap room, set up a small woodshop in the corner, and went back to the only thing I loved doing as a kid, working with wood. He let out a frustrated breath. It was supposed to be a quiet life, a peaceful one, but recently, the nightmares are getting worse. And when I'm working, my hands just start shaking out of nowhere. Sometimes, my heart gives this sharp twinge, like a warning. I tried to walk away from the stress, doctor, but it feels like my own body is punishing me for giving up. I feel like a total failure. Elise looked at the man sitting across from her. Her training told her to gently challenge his negative self-talk, to start mapping out a path to process his trauma. But sitting there, listening to the rain hit the glass, she didn't feel like a therapist. She felt a pang of intense, overwhelming envy. She glanced around her immaculate office, the heavy Cartier watch feeling like a handcuff. She was exhausted and desperately lonely, running the same corporate race that had chewed her up. But the fear of her past poverty kept her trapped on the treadmill. Elise put her notepad down on the coffee table. The clinical, polished tone left her voice completely. "You think you're a failure because you stepped back, Leo?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Leo blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift in her demeanor. "To me," Elise said, the honest words slipping out naturally, "you are the bravest person I have ever met. You actually dared to walk out of the cage that I am still gritting my teeth to lock myself inside every single day." "You haven't failed," Elise said, her voice softening. "You just stepped off the treadmill. You walked away from all the noise to live a simple, quiet life doing what you love, something I dream of every single night, but I'm too cowardly to actually do." The boundary between doctor and patient did not shatter all at once. It eroded slowly, through the glow of smartphone screens in the dead of night. It started as routine clinical check-ins. "Did you take the magnesium for the tremors?" Elise would type at 8 in the evening. "Yes, doctor." "Hands are steady today," Leo would reply. But as the week slipped by, the time stamps on the messages crept deeper into the night. Midnight, 1 in the morning, 2. The clinical tone faded, replaced by the quiet, desperate honesty of two lonely insomniacs finding each other in the dark. One Tuesday night, Elise sat on her velvet sofa, entirely swallowed by the shadows of her luxury penthouse. The city below was a sea of glittering lights, but her apartment felt like a tomb. Her phone vibrated on the glass coffee table. "The wood shop is freezing tonight," Leo's message read, "but the smell of the pine is nice. How is your glass fortress?" Elise stared at the screen. The professional wall she had maintained for a decade suddenly felt much too heavy to carry. Her thumbs moved across the keyboard before her rational mind could stop them. "It is too quiet. Honestly, Leo, the hardest part of my day is the front door. I stand in the hallway, holding the metal handle, terrified to turn it. Because I know the second it clicks open, there is absolutely nothing but dead air waiting for me on the other side." The 3 typing dots appeared on her screen. She held her breath. Then, the dots vanished. He did not reply. Elise closed her eyes, a wave of sharp professional shame washing over her. She had crossed the line. The next afternoon, the heavy oak door of her clinic opened. Leo walked in. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes heavier than usual, but his hands were steady. He did not walk to the patient's armchair. Instead, he stepped right up to her mahogany desk and gently set down a small, unmarked cardboard box. "I didn't know what to text back last night," Leo said, his voice low and raspy. "So I stayed up and made this." Elise looked at him, her heart doing a strange, frantic flutter. She reached out and lifted the cardboard lid. Inside rested a small, meticulously hand-carved wooden horse. The grain of the dark walnut was polished to a soft, warm gleam. But it wasn't just a carving. Woven into the wooden chest was a delicate, intricate wind-up motor made of tiny brass gears. "Take it out," Leo urged softly. Elise picked it up. It felt solid and warm in the palm of her hand. Leo reached over. His rough, calloused fingers brushed against hers, sending a sudden jolt of electricity up her arm. He pinched a tiny brass key on the side of the wooden horse and wound it 3 times. The tiny wooden hooves began to move, striking a small metal plate hidden at the base. The rhythmic, echoing sound filled the silent office. It sounded exactly like the steady, vibrant gallop of a miniature horse. Elise stared at the moving gears, mesmerized. "Hang it right inside your front door," Leo said, his gaze locked intensely on her face. "When you turn the handle, the vibration from the door opening will trigger the gears, and it will start ticking." Elise looked up, her vision suddenly blurred, tears welling hot and fast in her eyes. "It is not a toy, Elise," Leo whispered, his voice thick with raw, unguarded emotion. "It is a heartbeat. It's a knock on the door. So you know that in this massive, empty city, someone is still awake, listening for you to come home." A single tear broke free, tracing a warm line down Elise's cheek. She couldn't speak. For the very first time in her adult life, she wasn't the one analyzing, fixing, or carrying someone else's pain. Someone was finally holding hers. They didn't go out on traditional dates. They rarely saw each other outside the 4 walls of the clinic or the digital glow of their midnight texts. Yet, in those quiet, guarded spaces, a profound and private romance took root. Without a word, they had become each other's absolute emotional anchor, the only safe harbor they could lean on when their individual worlds threatened to collapse. Saturday afternoon brought a rare, pale sunlight to the city. The address Leo had texted led Elise to a decaying industrial strip on the Far East Side. She parked her sleek black Audi next to a rusted chain-link fence. Stepping out into the crisp air, her cashmere coat felt completely out of place. She pushed open the corrugated metal door of Unit 4. A rusted bell jingled weakly overhead. The air inside was thick with a haze of suspended sawdust. Elise blinked, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. This was not the artisanal, sweeping studio she had romanticized. It was a cramped garage. It smelled heavily of damp pine and stale coffee. In the center of the room, Leo stood hunched over a small workbench. He was meticulously sanding a small piece of wood. He didn't hear her over the whine of the sander. Elise walked closer, her eyes scanning the walls. There were no dining tables in progress, no elegant chairs. Instead, the warped wooden shelves were cluttered with unevenly stained combs and simple toy blocks. A piece of torn cardboard tacked to the wall read, "Toys, $3, combs, $5. "Leo?" Elise called out softly. He jumped slightly, hitting the power switch. The machine spun down, leaving a ringing silence in the room. He wiped his hands on his jeans, a hesitant smile breaking through his usual gloom. "You actually came," he said. "I wanted to see where you spend your days," Elise said, picking up one of the wooden blocks. It was perfectly smooth, completely safe. "You make all of these by hand?" "Yeah, keeps the hands busy." Leo shrugged, looking down. "Mostly I just give them away to the kids in the neighborhood or trade them to the diner next door for a sandwich." Elise frowned. "Leo, how do you cover the rent here by trading toys for sandwiches? Do you take larger commissions?" Leo's jaw tightened instantly. The soft smile vanished. He took the wooden block from her hand and tossed it onto the workbench. "I don't do custom orders, Elise. Custom means deadlines. Deadlines mean contracts, spreadsheets, and people waiting for me to fail." He ran a hand through his dusty hair, his voice rising with an edge of panic. "I want to keep things small, safe. I don't want to owe anyone anything." Elise looked at the scattered, cheap toys on the table. She didn't need a medical chart to understand what she was looking at. He wasn't building a business. He was hiding. The therapist inside her knew exactly what to say. She needed to challenge him. She needed to step back. But then, Leo took a step closer. He reached out, his rough thumb gently brushing a speck of sawdust from her cheek. The scent of cedar wrapped around her. Elise's bones ached with a deep, chronic exhaustion. The city demanded perfection every single second of her life. But this dusty garage, it demanded absolutely nothing. She didn't step back. She closed her eyes and rested her forehead against his chest. Leo let out a shaky breath, wrapping his arms tightly around her. It felt incredibly peaceful. But as she stood there, holding him in the dim light, Elise slowly opened her eyes. She stared over his shoulder at the unfinished toys. The woodshop was perfectly silent, but for the very first time, the silence didn't sound like peace. It sounded like a surrender. The illusion of their peaceful romance did not shatter with a dramatic argument. It shattered with a desperate phone call on a freezing Tuesday morning. "Dr. Vance? I'm Leo's landlord. He passed out in the hallway. He told me to call you." 30 minutes later, Elise was running up 3 flights of dimly lit, concrete stairs in a rundown apartment building on the south side of the city. She stopped dead in front of door 3B. A bright neon pink paper was taped directly over the peephole. "Final eviction notice. Past due." Elise ripped the paper off and pushed the unlocked door open. "Leo?" The air inside the cramped apartment was biting cold. The radiator was completely dead, but it was the smell that hit her first, a stale, artificial scent of MSG and cheap sodium. She walked into the tiny kitchenette. The counter was entirely buried under a mountain of empty styrofoam cups. Instant ramen. Dozens of them, stacked haphazardly next to a dry sink. "Elise?" A weak voice rasped from the living room. She found Leo lying on a sagging futon, shivering violently under a remarkably thin blanket. His skin was pale, his cheekbones jutting out sharply beneath his stubble. He looked incredibly fragile, not like a brave man who had rebelled against society, but like a starving man who had simply given up. Elise rushed to his side, pressing the back of her hand against his freezing forehead. "Leo, what happened? Should I call an ambulance?" "No," he mumbled, weakly pushing her hand away. He refused to meet her eyes. "Just dizzy. I stood up too fast. I'll be fine." Elise stood up. She walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up one of the empty styrofoam cups. It felt weightless in her hand. "Leo," she said, her voice dropping to a low, trembling whisper, "when was the last time you ate a real meal?" He turned his face toward the peeling wallpaper. "Money is just a little tight this month. The savings account. It ran out faster than I calculated. People aren't buying wooden toys in the winter." Elise closed her eyes. The heavy, suffocating weight she had been running away from her entire life suddenly crashed down on her shoulders. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. The survivor inside her, the little girl who grew up in poverty, instinctively took over. She walked out into the hallway, tracked down the gruff landlord, and pulled a platinum credit card from her designer purse. She paid 3 months of back rent in a single swipe. Then, she drove to the nearest grocery store. She filled 2 carts with fresh chicken, vegetables, milk, and thick, whole-grain bread. She swiped her card again. 2 hours later, the apartment was warm. A heavy pot of chicken soup was boiling on the electric stove. Leo sat at the small dining table, hunched over a steaming bowl. He ate slowly, his hands trembling around the spoon. He looked completely humiliated. Elise leaned against the kitchen counter, watching him. The romantic haze of the dusty wood shop evaporated, leaving only a cold, harsh reality. The admiration she had felt for his supposed strength was rapidly giving way to a deep, silent exhaustion. She realized she was no longer his lover. She had just become his caretaker. Love cannot boil water, she thought bitterly, looking at the glowing red coils of the stove. Love cannot pay the electricity bill. Leo stopped eating. He stared down at his half-empty bowl. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking with shame. "I'm so sorry you had to see me like this. I was going to figure it out." Elise walked over and gently placed a hand on his hunched shoulder. There was no anger in her voice, only a profound, heartbreaking weariness. "You don't have to apologize for being sick," Elise said softly, staring at the tower of empty ramen cups in the trash bin. "But Leo, peace shouldn't smell like half-eaten instant noodles." The rain lashed violently against the windshield of Elise's Audi. On the passenger seat, her phone screen glowed with a single, devastating email. Immediate temporary suspension of license pending malpractice investigation. 10 years. 10 years of fighting her way out of poverty, of building a flawless reputation. Gone in a single, fabricated lawsuit from a vindictive client. The burnout she had been suppressing for years finally swallowed her whole. She didn't go home. She drove straight to the industrial district and pushed the heavy metal door of Unit 4 open. Leo was sanding a piece of wood. He looked up and froze. Elise stood dripping in the doorway, her expensive coat soaked, her mask of perfection entirely shattered. She walked toward him, her shoulders shaking, and collapsed into his chest. "They took my license, Leo," she sobbed, her voice raw and defeated. "I lost everything." Leo dropped his tools and wrapped his arms tightly around her. For exactly 3 seconds, the smell of sawdust and his warm embrace felt like the ultimate sanctuary. It felt like she could finally stop fighting. But then, the atmosphere shifted. He didn't tell her they would fight the board. He didn't offer to help her find a lawyer. Instead, he pulled back just enough to frame her wet face in his calloused hands. Elise looked up. His eyes weren't filled with sympathy or anger on her behalf. They were wide, feverish, and unnervingly bright. "Then let them take it," Leo whispered fiercely. Elise blinked through her tears, confused. "What?" "Let them have it, Elise," he repeated, his thumbs wiping the rain from her cheeks with frantic energy. "You hate that clinic. It's killing you anyway. This is our way out." He grabbed her hands, pressing them hard against his chest. "Leave it all behind. Come here." "Move into the woodshop with me," Leo pleaded, his voice thick with a manic, desperate kind of romance. "We will turn off our phones. We shut this metal door on the whole world. We can live a simple, peaceful life right here. I need you, Elise. Stay with me, so my hands never shake again." If this were a movie, the music would swell here. She would say yes, and they would hide away from the cruel city in the sawdust. But the music didn't swell. All Elise could hear was the metallic drumming of the storm on the tin roof and the sudden, deafening alarm bells in her own mind. "Stay with me, so my hands never shake again." The words echoed in her head. Her tears stopped cold. She looked at his desperate, pleading face, and the heavy fog of her exhaustion instantly cleared. He didn't see her tragedy. He saw an excuse. Elise slowly pulled her hands out of his grip. "Live here?" Elise asked, her voice dropping to a trembling whisper. "Shut the door on the world? Leo, how do we eat?" "We'll figure it out," Leo said quickly, stepping closer, reaching for her again. "I'll sell more carvings. You can help me. We don't need their money or their pressure, Elise. We just need peace." "Peace?" Elise echoed, taking a step back. The romantic illusion shattered violently. The memory of his freezing apartment, the neon pink eviction notice, and the mountain of empty ramen cups flashed vividly behind her eyes. "Peace costs money, Leo. Rent costs money. You were starving 3 days ago until I swiped my credit card to pay your landlord." That was a rough patch. Leo raised his voice, a flash of defensive anger crossing his face. "If you are here, I can focus. I won't be as anxious. I can be better. You make me better, Elise." Elise stared at him in the dim yellow light. The heartbreak was absolute, crushing her chest heavier than the lawsuit ever could. He didn't want a partner to stand back to back with against the storm. He wanted a human Xanax. He wanted to use her love as a sedative to numb his own cowardice, dressing up his surrender to the world as a romantic escape. Leo watched the empathy drain completely from Elise's face. His wounded pride flared into a sudden, defensive rage. "Right," Leo spat, his voice turning bitter. He stepped back and violently swept his arm across the workbench. Tools, sandpaper, and wooden blocks clattered loudly onto the concrete floor. Elise didn't flinch. "In the end, you are exactly like the rest of them," Leo shouted over the heavy drumming of the rain. "You just look at the prestige, the success. You never loved the real me, Elise. You just looked at a broken man and saw another damn project to fix." The accusation struck the old, deep scars of her childhood poverty. But it didn't break her. Her gaze turned razor-sharp, stripped of all romantic illusion. She stepped forward, her voice eerily calm. "I love the peace you gave me, Leo," Elise said, articulating every single word. "But I realize now, you aren't asking me to build a home." She looked around the damp, dusty walls of the garage, then straight into his eyes. "You are asking me to hide in a bomb shelter." Leo's breath hitched. He stood completely frozen. "And we can't survive in here," Elise continued, her voice trembling but resolute. "We need to eat. We need to live. I refuse to just blindly surrender to poverty because you are too afraid to go back outside." She looked down at his shaking hands. "If I stay in this room, I won't be your partner, Leo. I will just be the painkiller you use to numb your fear of the world." The absolute truth of her words ripped away the last shreds of his self-deception. All the color drained from his face. The city was a blur of neon and storm as they both retreated into the night. Elise stood in the center of her pitch-black penthouse, completely soaked to the bone. Water dripped from her expensive coat onto the pristine hardwood floor. She slid slowly down the cold wall until she hit the ground. Her trembling hands reached for the thick manila folder waiting on her glass coffee table. The malpractice lawsuit, the threat to her entire existence. She was completely alone. But as she opened the file, her mind was razor sharp. The paralyzing fog of burnout was gone. The memory of Leo's empty refrigerator and the eviction notice had jolted her awake. She was replaced by a cold, fierce instinct to survive. She would fight this war by herself. Miles away, in a dark, freezing apartment, Leo sat slumped on the edge of his sagging futon. The silence in the room was deafening. There was no hum of a refrigerator, no heater. Elise's words echoed relentlessly in the dark, ringing like a death knell for his carefully constructed delusion. An unsafe shelter, a painkiller. He looked down at his hands. Without Elise there to hold them, without the illusion of their romance to distract him, his fingers were shaking violently. They trembled with the undeniable terror of a man who had finally realized the truth. He hadn't protected himself from the world. He had just chased away the only person who had ever truly tried to save him. The morning sun cut sharply through the glass walls of the downtown law firm. Elise walked into the conference room. The sharp, authoritative click of her heels on the marble floor signaled the return of Dr. Vance. She was wearing her most ruthless, tailored navy suit. The paralyzing burnout of the past year had been completely burned away by the storm. She dropped a thick binder onto the mahogany table. Here are the email timestamps, the contradictory statements, and the financial motives behind her false claim, Elise told her defense attorney, her voice hard as steel. I spent 10 years climbing out of poverty to build my practice. I am not letting her or the medical board take it away. We go to war. She had chosen to face the cruel, demanding world instead of running from it. 2 days later, her phone vibrated on her desk. A single text message from Leo. There were no desperate apologies. No dramatic pleas to get back together. Just a quiet, brutal honesty. You were right, Elise. My shelter was collapsing, and I almost dragged you down under the rubble with me. Thank you for waking me up. I shaved today. I just sent out my first resume. Elise read the words twice. A quiet, profound sense of respect washed over her. She locked her screen and set the phone down. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. That text was a man's ultimate, realistic redemption. 2 years passed. In a modest, brightly lit office building across town, a printer hummed quietly. Leo sat behind a small desk. He wore a cleanly pressed button-down shirt, a simple ID badge clipped to his belt reading, Financial Consultant. He looked older, the glamorous aura of his former executive life gone forever. But as he sat with a local bakery owner, explaining a simple tax form, he picked up a black pen to sign the paperwork. His hand was perfectly steady, not a single tremor. He was finally facing the world again. Across the city, Elise sat in her clinic. The sterile, intimidating atmosphere of the room was gone. Warm sunlight filtered through several large, lush green ferns she had placed in the corners. She closed her laptop right at 5 o'clock. She had cut her patient load completely in half. She no longer needed a wooden bunker or a broken man to find her peace. She had finally learned how to cultivate it herself. That evening, Elise stood in front of her penthouse door. She slid the heavy key into the lock and turned it. As the door swung open, the vibration triggered the tiny brass gears mounted on the inside panel. Click-clack, click-clack, click-clack. The little wooden horse galloped cheerfully, its rhythmic heartbeat filling the warm, inviting entryway. Elise looked at it, taking off her coat. A soft, complete smile touched her lips. He taught me how to stop, how to breathe, and how to finally rest. Elise's voice echoed softly. And I left him with a reason to stand back up and keep walking. Some love stories aren't meant to end with a ring or a shared home. Some love is simply born to save us from ourselves, and then, beautifully, walk away. Not every love story is meant to end with a shared home. Sometimes, two people are brought together simply to wake each other up, to hold each other through the darkest hour, and then, to give each other the courage to finally walk away. If Elise and Leo's journey resonated with you, or if you've ever had to choose your own peace over love, share your thoughts in the comments below.